Welcome to another episode of the Graphisoft Talks Podcast. I'm your host, Nathan Hildebrand, and today I'm talking with Tatsuro Kawai from Graphisoft Japan. So thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us today, Tats. Now, for those watching today, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Where it all began. You're a global traveler. It'd be good to understand the journey that you've taken to get yourself to Graphisoft to start off with.
Well, I'm originally from Japan. I finished my junior high school in Japan, and I moved to Australia. I did my high school and university in Sydney, and I studied. My first degree was chemical engineering. And after that, after some years working in Sydney and in Tokyo, I decided to go to Hungary. Mainly because most of my family were moving to Europe to study. So I decided to pick a country in Europe, and I just picked Hungary for out of blue. Then when I moved, there was always been a passion to study architecture, and I found out there's a university in Budapest that I could learn in English, so why not give it a go? So I started studying, and in the beginning, I was working for a Japanese company part-time, and then I went to Graphisoft seminar because my friend just told me about this company, Graphisoft. They making a seminar for students, and they're going to give out a free pizza after the seminar. So I said, why not? So I just went to the seminars, and at the end of the seminar, I asked a bunch of questions about education, and they were giving a presentation mainly on education program they were planning to do. So at the time, I started using Archicad because it's in Hungary. Most of students use Archicad during their study. So because of that, I had lots of questions to ask, a bit of complaints as well, Yeah, so they took it really well. They listened to me, and but after the whole seminar, I was enjoying my pizza, and then the former CEO Dominic and my ex-boss Akash, he asked me if I'm interested in doing education in Graphisoft, and I said, no, I'm busy now. I have a job, so maybe in the future. And shortly after, the summer holiday came, and I decided to stay in Budapest, and I needed something to do, and so I just called up Graphisoft, and I'm available. And they said, "Okay, please come in for summer intern." And that's the moment. That's the time I started working for Graphisoft, and I went straight into education program that they were doing at the time. And and ever since I stayed. Over the summer, they asked me to stay longer, and I stayed. And altogether, I stayed in Budapest for another 5 or 6 years until I decided to move on to the next journey.
So it's a really interesting transition. You're a bit of a global traveler. So you're born in Japan. You moved to Australia and studied chemical engineering, and then decide, chemical engineering is not for me. I'm going to move to Hungary and study architecture. And obviously, being the home of Graphisoft, it almost kind of captures you. Obviously in those days, a lot of people that were studying architecture, all the people that worked at Graphisoft were had architecturally trained and the like. But, you came on board at Graphisoft headquarters at that time. What year was that? Like, how long ago was that?
That was back in 2006.
So quite a while ago.
Quite a while ago, yeah.
So you're nearing 20 years. You're at 17. No, I can't even add up anymore. Is that 17 years? It is 17 years.
Something like that, yeah. So 6 years in headquarters in Budapest, and after Budapest, I was in Poland for a short while, and I moved back to Japan in 2012, and I started working there in Tokyo office since.
So you've been there now for 11 years, and over the last 17 years, you've obviously gone on a bit of a journey as well with regards to the kind of role that you've played within the organisation, because obviously there's the different roles that you could play working in Graphisoft headquarters because of how diverse, essentially head office actually is, and then moving into Graphisoft Japan as a local office serving the Japanese market. But can you talk through, I guess, the various roles that you've kind of played in the last 17 years?
Yep. Well, so in Budapest, I was mainly working in education and first in product management. And also I was helping creating materials for educators and the students, training materials. And then we had a big project to make a new website for students to obtain license easily. And there was a project making a website, gathering global partners to take up in this, join the program and help distribute Archicad to all students and teachers in schools. That was my prime task in Budapest. And once I moved back to Japan, I had a little more task. I managed to keep the education part for the local market. But beside that, I had the responsibility to localize. As you know, Archicad, we make it in English and we translate to localized a bunch of languages, localized versions. And for Japan, I've been responsible for localizing to Japanese versions. And beside that, I'm also a product owner for Solibri. We start selling Solibri back in 2012. And a bit of marketing as well, so bits and pieces.
So you're a man of all trades in many ways, and I think that's something that kind of plays well in any organization, that you will come in and put on any hat that's needed to enable, a business to move forward. And obviously you've talked about the education side of things, and from your perspective, I'd be good to go through some of the kind of these roles that you're playing currently in Graphisoft Japan. And first of all, touching on education, from your perspective, how important is the education side of any BIMS authoring software in terms of that early adoption of tools, and what sort of difference does it make to the the actual Graphisoft clients, in terms of architects that are using the software in Japan?
Yeah, I think it's depending on school, private or public schools and universities. The adoption rate of BIM is quite low in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to do quite a bit of marketing, letting people know what is BIM, educating them.
Yes.
But also then they start with, providing applications and try to provide materials, learning content, and support. We didn't have everything in the beginning, but first, what we had in the beginning is free license for everyone, education.
Yep.
So that was we had that as a base from the very start. So in Japan, we start to, of course, market the education program, but slowly start create content for student. Also start doing not just the support for troubleshooting, but actual operation side. If they have any, they have to, some critical issue they can't solve and they have to submit in a few days, we are there to help. So we extended our support policy to education only in Japan and maybe a few other countries too. It's not global at the moment, but we helped students and teachers to take up, learn BIM software. And as you know, Archicad, it's not easy software. It takes, the learning curve span is quite long compared to
Yes.
Traditional CAD application, understanding concept. So, our aim was to not only provide application, but also educate them with the BIM and learn BIM mindset, concept, skills through using our software, and also helping teachers who does that on in the classroom. So we have achieved that in many countries since we start to education has regained new attention from the company, and also various market education is really important role, and they're working hard in this segment.
Now, another part of your role you talked about is in product management and Archicad and Solibri. So it's kind of a Nemetschek hat rather than a pure Graphisoft hat. What are the kind of overall in that product management role in a local office of Graphisoft? So this is the key thing is I guess for people to understand what the role of someone in product management does in their local Graphisoft office. What does that role mean in terms of what's the kind of tasks that you have to undertake with regards to engagement with customers, roadmap and the like potentially?
Yeah. Well, if we're talking about Solibri, yes, it's we started Solibri in Japan in 2012. Um, it's all started with the localization. They didn't have a Japanese version at the start, so our first task was to work with Solibri to localize application to Japanese. Um, and yeah, so once we got that localized, it's continuous work because they provided the updates time to time. So it was continuous work with Solibri to localize the product. And in the beginning, they weren't Nemetschek Group, so they were just a company from Finland. We know about the software, but in Japan, it wasn't didn't have much attention. Maybe because the BIM adoption in maturity in Japan wasn't that high back then, 10 years ago. But slowly, like we introduced the product, we learned the product, we try to educate our customers what is also Solibri, what it does, what helps you in your business. And over the years, I think we had a very good team collecting information from Solibri, localizing materials, teaching the customers, doing the class, hands-ons, and slowly Solibri start to get more attentions, and we start sell more. And I think it's ever since we started, we have a very good growth in terms of number of users in Japan. Hope I answered your questions.
It must be a lot of fun having to speak in English. I take it for granted so much, and it's a challenge, I think, for people working in a global company, where you have to turn your languages on and off all the time. So you're doing well so far, Tat, so I wouldn't be too worried, mate. Now, moving on to language, and I think this is actually really, really important. Now, one of the things you talked about was localization. And from my perspective, I think this is another thing that is a topic that I think a lot of Archicad users from around the world take a lot for granted. It's kind of fitting that we move on to localization, in terms of languages, right? And from my perspective, I think localization is something that's very, very underrated. I think most users, when a new release comes out, they just go, yep, I'm going to download either the international version or my local region's version, and away I go. Now, in the background in Graphisoft, there's a lot of work that goes on to actually make these extra localizations actually occur. So, Tats, can you take us through the journey that you would take from, the early phases of the new release of Archicad, and then transition it to localize it for the Japanese market?
I can talk about localization, the work I do, responsible doing for Japanese version. It starts nice and early. Even before beta version, we start to uh, look into new product, understanding products, and we get a bunch of strings text that we need to translate for the new version. And back and forth, I work with localization team in Budapest, and we don't do all in one chunk, but slowly, a new feature comes in, and for that we need additional string to include it in the localization. Uh, and after that, parallelly, we start do the documentation as well. The help, the help has expanded to over 3,500 pages, quite long documents. And whenever we have something new, we have to edit. And there's also some modification because replacement feature or modification in the future. So a lot of work. It's done in changes are made in international, and every language have to follow that. So just for documentation, we have like a lot of translators working on this, and after translating, proofreading comes in, and it's once again it's a long document. I usually for Japanese version I distribute among my team members and I beg them to proofread the document so that we have a good quality documentation. Because it's translators, often they don't have much knowledge about the software, Archicad, or the architecture. So it is important to proofread the content document. And maybe we spend more time checking the application as well. The new features, new tools, we translate to one thing, but maybe it doesn't fit well in Japanese. So we revise it, maybe make changes. And it's many hours is spent on checking and correcting, and because we want to give a good quality product, not even in Japanese or any other language. I think it's every other language also follow the same process. But it is exciting, I get to see new features and thinking about how the user will, react to looking at the new tools and features, and I get to work. I'll be the kind of interface, providing easy to understand, good tools. So it should have the good translation for the user to appreciate the feature as well. So it is excitement, personally. So it's a lot of people get involved, and it's often ready. We have to work with deadlines a lot because every development is done until quite late phase, and once we just localization team, they work to the minutes. They try to get everything done, and followed by the QC, QA, and then electrical delivery. It's a lot of process step they have to go through, and they have to go through for every single version. So as you mentioned, yes, they are underrated. I think it's the work they do is fantastic under such a pressure. So I really appreciate what they do, and also their dedication on the time they spend on the helping us to make a better localized version for our market.
So one of the things you talked about, and I found this really interesting, is that you said there was only 3,500 pages. You must have a nice, the Japanese language must be nice and short compared to English, because I think that from memory, I think it's around 4,500 pages now for the international version. So it looks a little bit. The Japanese characters must be shorter or something. Maybe we might be lucky.
I'm not really up to date with page numbers, but a few years ago it was 2,000, 3,500.
That's not good. You're the one that's converting it. What are you doing? You're behind. One of the other things that you talked about with regards to localization, and this is a question I'm asking all of the guests, is you know what their favorite feature in Archicad is, and what really excited me was is that you're talking about what is occurring when you're sitting there and you're doing your localizations and you're going, I'm waiting to see how excited people are about this new release and the new feature. You know, obviously you've been there for 17 years, which is a lot of releases of Archicad. It's a lot of time that you've spent there. But, is there a feature that, is your, overall favorite?
My favorite, yes. Um, Trace reference. I think it was back in Archicad 10 or 11. And I think I was learning. I was at the university at the time, just making plans on the paper and using trace paper. So seeing that actually, being able to do on the computer, on Archicad, I was quite fascinated. Like, it's the things I do physically doing on the computer. It was quite. I remember I was quite excited seeing that.
I have to admit I use the trace feature nearly every day, but I too cannot remember the release that it came out.
Yes, I think it was back in either version 10 or 11.
Obviously most of your time you have spent not working on features directly in Archicad, but let's kind of switch it over a little bit, and because you haven't actually worked directly on the software, let's talk about what's one of the projects that you've worked on within Archicad, knowing that the education's one part, translation, localization's another. What's probably the most the favorite project or the project you're most proud of that you've worked on whilst you've been at Graphisoft?
A project. Beside education, then, so project on the software side.
Well, it could be a project within Graphisoft in itself. Like, the thing is we perform roles in our jobs all the time, and I think that there's a lot of things that go on in Graphisoft that the users don't actually know that actually go on, or something becomes part of the public face and people actually don't know who did it. Like, there's some incredible people that I know have created some of the lovely movies that we've seen produced as part of presentations that have been put forward, and unless you know who it was, you don't know, right? So it's one of those things. Is there a project that you worked on that you're so excited about and passionate about that you're really proud of and go, you know what, I did that?
Nathan, maybe I did. This is something I didn't tell you. Since 2014, I started to run a student BIM competition in Vietnam. We did this because there was no Vietnam at the time. We didn't have market presence in the country in Vietnam. So I worked closely with the local universities and distributors, a distributor, to make an event, and it happened to be BIM competition, Archicad BIM competition, and over the years, we start to grow. And I think I remember the last time I was involved back in 2019, before the COVID. It became the national-wide BIM, maybe the biggest BIM competition in Vietnam. So that was a bit of something to talk about.
Well, that's an exciting project. So you've been doing that since 2014.
Yes, and in 2019, I passed it on to the local distributors, so they're taking care of the whole project now. But I remember I started with one university, and year to year we have more university, and And how many? I think towards the end we had about 600 applications, registrants each year. So it got bigger and bigger, and we had a very good prize as well for the students.
I was almost going to turn my sarcasm on and say that's not a lot of people, but that's a very impressive competition to have 600 students come on board. And I guess some of those things that sometimes it must be sad to have to let go of that because it's like kind of like you gave birth to it, as your baby. Essentially, you kind of made this exciting thing. Handing it over to the local team must be, a challenge. Is like, please look after it like I've always looked after it. But we've spoken kind of at a high level, I guess, about some of the challenges as well, or the amount of energies and effort that's required to go into localization, which I think kind of has opened the door, I guess, for people that are watching or listening today to kind of understand there are a fair bit of challenges that are involved in the back end of the software to actually get it across the line so that it's actually a usable software. But is there anything else potentially you could share with the Archicad users that are listening and watching today that they might not actually know about software development, or the pieces of the puzzle that you've worked on? Like for me, that hearing about your role in setting up a national BIM competition for students has blown me away. I'm excited by that. I want to know more now, Tats. There's a lot of things going on inside with what you've been bringing to the global market that I have no idea about.
Recording at night with Postapal. I used to do recording for. I was doing narration as well for Japanese online materials, videos, and one of the external contractor for recording the sound. He worked in like some suburb in Budapest, and he preferred working at night. So I usually go to his house around dinner time, and we start working like 10 or 11 o'clock because at night it's nice and quiet, no traffic in his home studio. So I used to work at night, like around 11 till like 2 or 3 in the morning, doing narration for the training video. So that was it was a fun memories with people working with the marketing team, creating learning contents.
Going down memory lane now. We're going down memory lane. So I want you to find something that you think that is really, really exciting. Well, it could be even boring, right? But we've got to find something.
Yeah. Maybe I can mention about the release for educational version.
Yep.
Because our users, educators and students, they are also excited about the new version as well and new features that come with it. We coordinated with partners to release the new version around the same time, or maybe at the same time as commercial version. So the coordinating that release with different market for the localization version, it was a lot of work arranging that, scheduling all that release. And back then, maybe recently, like we start to produce more, have this release, more version, localized version release. It's, in bulk, more at the same time. But several years ago, we release was staged, so we released several localized version at a time over the span of 5-6 months.
No, thanks very much for sharing that, Tats. It's an important thing to understand the amount of work that goes on behind the scenes to actually get a release out to market, and to realize that there's so many steps involved in actually making it happen. Now, I have one last question for you today, and it's a question that I like to ask all of the guests that I have on. What are the hobbies that you have on outside of your role at Graphisoft? What's the things that you love to do, before you get to work in the morning or when you leave in the evening?
I have quite a lot of hobbies. One of them could be rugby. When I moved to Australia, I started playing rugby, and I really got into it. And ever since I've been a rugby player. 10 years ago, I came back to Japan and I started playing touch rugby, a bit of touch rugby, and I got really serious and I kept playing. And I think it's in 2015, I was selected for the national team for the World Cup in 2015 in Australia. So up to that year, I was playing a lot of touch rugby. And yeah, and yeah. So in general, I love team sports. I'm too lazy. I can't do swimming or tennis. It's I hate solo sports. Team sports is my thing. Too lazy. Somebody push me and I'll come along. And beside that, I love traveling and cooking. I've been traveling all my life, but I still, it is a passion to go to places I've never been before, meeting new people, and nowadays meeting old friends in other different part of the world. I love it. And the other thing is I do every day is cooking. I take up cooking quite seriously since last year, and I'm learning Japanese food again, just learning from the basic, cooking every single day for my family.
So when we come to Japan, we're going to make sure we drop in and visit you and make sure you cook us a meal.
Just come over. I will cook up.
So Tats, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with us today and talk to us about the role and the journey that you've had at Graphisoft and learning a little bit more about what you're actually doing in your day-to-day job.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm glad. I enjoyed talking to you.
So thanks very much for joining us today for our episode at Graphisoft Talk. We'll be back again in the future to have our next episode. So make sure if you haven't listened to our previous episodes that you take the time to catch up and listen to those other episodes. But we'll be back with you shortly. So until then, keep learning.